Welcome once again to Cooking with Gerry. Let's get the fire started so we can start to make tonight's dinner. So the fire's on low. I have a Teflon frying pan. I'm going to add less than half a cup of water. And I'm going to add about 1 tablespoon of virgin olive oil. The water in the pan makes it a cooking process that is not going to have so much direct heat on the vegetables, which will create less damage. The cooking process does damage the fruit, vegetables, or meat, and the higher the heat that you use, the more damage is created. So this is a low heat, and the heat is, going to be almost indirect because it'll come mainly from the water. And the oil I like to add because it just gives an extra flavor. Boiling food is really not so exciting, not so tasty, so that little bit of oil will add some flavor. Here I have washed and cleaned some vegetables. This is celery, 2 stalks of celery, and the guidelines for this kind of cooking is whatever's the most dense vegetable in terms of how long it takes to cook goes in first. And with these 3 vegetables that I have, it's the celery that requires the most cooking time. So that's going to go in first. And then I have a broccoli. The broccoli stalk is similar as far as cook time required as the celery. So that's going to go in at the same time. Small-ish pieces makes the cooking quicker. And I like to put the flowers in later because the flowers cook in less time, and I prefer to have a crunch with my vegetables. And if you can see the way I remove or cut the flour, I go about halfway into the flour and then I tear it apart using my fingers on one side and the knife on the other. I'll do that with all these bigger pieces of flour, trying to get bite-sized pieces so it's easier when I sit with my plate and my spoon. I almost always eat with a spoon. Nope, that's not going in. Not yet, because it's easier. Eating with a spoon I find easier, sometimes with a fork, but most of the time with a spoon. My handy dandy, very useful spatula. And I have a tomato also washed and cleaned. I'm going to cut this into small pieces, and this can go in also right now. This looks like a really good tomato. I think this was grown locally. A lot of times when you buy a tomato, the inside is almost hollow. But this, when I found it at the store yesterday, I could tell that it was full because it was a lot heavier than many of the other tomatoes. So very likely someone has tomato plants growing in the area and they brought them to this store up the hill to sell to the locals. Win. Now this is a fairly simple process, quick and easy, and I want to spend most of the time for this video discussing the other part of the dinner because I think it's important. And I think it's important enough that I'm actually repeating what we did earlier today with the previous video. what I had made earlier, I made enough for 2 meals. So I have leftovers right here that I'll show you in a second. For breakfast, I put in a frying pan a small piece of pumpkin that I chopped up into small cubes, as well as an apple that I had chopped up and cut into small pieces. And I put that same cooking method, a bit of water, a bit of oil. I let that cook for about 5 minutes, and then I added, when the heat was off, pumpkin seed, a small handful, and the same small handful of sunflower seed. So that was the breakfast with this, and the dinner I am choosing more vegetables and no fruit. But let me show you what this is, and I think it's important enough to do it in 2 different videos, even on the same day, because it's very nutritional. It's much better, provides a lot more nutrition than the original side dish, which would be potatoes, French fries, mashed potatoes, sometimes carrot, sometimes rice, sometimes bread. Much more nutrition in something like this than those other food items. And it also has a much higher protein and fat content, which will help to balance the blood sugar. Any kind of sugar that I'm going to get from these vegetables will be balanced by the nutrition that's in that dish, which I will explain right now. What it is whole grain wheat and quinoa that I put in a saucepan with a little bit of water. The usual measurement for these kinds of seeds and grains is 2 to 1. 2 parts water, 1 part seed or grain. And I like to mix different grains and seeds together. There's amaranth, which is a seed, quinoa, which is a seed, whole grain wheat, which is a grain, and also I like the whole grain rice. I would also like wild rice, but I can't find it, and there's different kinds of rice you can find. The white rice is very low in nutritional value, and it very quickly turns to sugar once it enters your stomach. Many cultures eat the white rice 2 or 3 times a day. So it depends on what level of information you have to prepare the food. So this is going well. I'll let it go for another 2 minutes, then I'll add the broccoli flour. And in that saucepan with the water was also a bit of salt, about half a teaspoon, and about a tablespoon of virgin olive oil. I like to add the oil because it makes it so that the grain and the seed won't stick together. So the grain and the seed cooked for about 15 minutes. Also at the beginning, I forgot to mention, I also added raw peanut washed and rinsed, and flax seed washed and rinsed, and sesame seed washed and rinsed. So they all cooked together for about 25 minutes. I noticed that I needed more water because the peanuts and the flax and the sesame also absorb water during the cooking process. So I added about 100 mils of water after about 15 minutes of cooking. And then I turned the heat off. There was a little bit of liquid, so I also added 2 tablespoons of chia seed, and letting everything sit together for about 10-15 minutes. All the water was absorbed, and you see what you have. This morning it was a variation, another alternative for the usual oatmeal porridge, because many people think porridge, oat flakes are healthy, but they are another one of those foods that very quickly turn into sugar once it goes into your stomach. Adding other proteins and fats to your porridge will help to balance that blood sugar. Adding seeds, nuts, nut butter. Sometimes I also add an egg to my oatmeal porridge. The grain and the seed, the whole wheat grain and the quinoa, much less sugar content than the oat flake. So that's what that is, and I believe it's important enough to show you twice in the same day, hoping that you'll see at least one of the videos from today, and you'll get the idea to use this instead of your usual side dish for one of your meals. Now I'm going to add the broccoli. And the last thing I wanted to say about this is, and I don't think I mentioned it in the earlier video, you can do everything in one saucepan or one frying pan if it's big enough. Even if you want meat or pork, beef, chicken, fish, you can do everything in one pot. Let me try and explain how that would happen. You need something fairly big. Also depends on how many people you're preparing for. If you have a small piece of meat or pork or chicken, you can put everything in at the same time. In this situation, you can put the meat, chicken, pork, the quinoa, amaranth, or whole grain wheat or whole grain rice. If you want to add the flaxseed, sesame seed, peanut, add everything into the pot at the same time with the appropriate amount of water, salt, and some kind of oil, virgin olive oil. I also use sometimes coconut oil or sunflower seed oil. Put everything in, okay, and then as far as the vegetables go, you would follow the same basic guidelines. Whatever is the most dense would be the next to go in. So say you leave the meat and the seeds and the grain to cook for about 15 minutes. Then you add celery, and if you have something else that's dense to cook, cabbage, carrot, beetroot, you would add that at the same time. Wait for 5 minutes and then add the other vegetables that don't take so long to cook. You could add those in. And then within 25 or 30 minutes, everything is ready. If you have bigger pieces of meat, like say a chicken drumstick or a chicken thigh, you might want to put that in the pot 5 or 10 minutes early so that it has those extra minutes to cook before you add the grain and the seeds, and then 10 minutes after you would add the vegetables, depending on the order of density, how long they take to cook. If you want to do fish, many times the fish is very thin and it doesn't need full 25 minutes to cook. Depends on how thick that piece of fish is. If it's thin, then you would add it to the pot when there's about 15 minutes left of cook time, or 10 minutes, depends on if it's really thin. If it's very thick, you might add it at the beginning. So that's a very easy way to prepare all this healthy stuff while only using one saucepan. You can also at the end or at some point add some cheese, or if you like bacon, you would put the bacon in at the appropriate time. If you want to cook the bacon beforehand and then add it in right at the end, also drizzling on the cheese. Lots of different options. A really good way to prepare your food, because as I said at the beginning, you're not frying directly in oil and you're not boiling, which is not quite as exciting. And many times when food is boiled, that water goes down the drain, and that water has a lot of the valuable nutrients that came out of the food during the cooking process. So that was what I wanted to say, and I really hope that the message gets out that this quinoa and amaranth, which are seeds, the whole grain wheat, whole grain rice, that they become more mainstream in our meals compared to the most common vegetable, which is potato, and it's not really a vegetable. And many times there's bread, which is also not quite so healthy if you're able to understand that the bread has the equivalent of 1 tablespoon of sugar. One slice of that store-bought bread will have the same effect on your body as 1 tablespoon of sugar. And the sandwich that many people eat for lunch, which is 2 pieces of bread, that's 2 tablespoons of sugar. That's going to affect your blood sugar, increase the level of blood sugar, cause the body to release the hormones necessary to remove that blood sugar, that sugar from the blood, and it will get stored as fatty tissue. So please try it. You might be surprised. I can remember before I left Italy, I was talking to the youngest cousin from my generation, and we had both decided that quinoa wasn't as satisfying as pasta or rice. It's a very light when you eat it. So in the time since we had that discussion about 4 years ago, I started adding more stuff to the quinoa and combining it with the whole grain wheat or the whole grain rice. In this case, there's peanuts, sesame seed, flaxseed. So this is now satisfying. It's a very satisfying chew, and my stomach feels like it's gotten a good amount of food and nutrition. When I eat the other potato, sweet potato, rice, I feel that there's disharmony is the best word I can use. It feels heavy in my stomach. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add this into the veggie dish. There is a little bit of liquid, and it will be absorbed by what's in there, and that will get heated up a little bit. I'll add a little bit of salt, one of my extra virgin oils, and that's my dinner. Fairly light. The heaviest thing would be the peanuts and the oil I'm going to use, but because it's light, it will be at least partially or mostly digested by the time I go to sleep, which is important because during sleep time, digestion slows down a lot. So if you're eating a big meal and then 1 or 2 hours later you go to bed, there's food still in your stomach, that digestion process slows down, which means a much better opportunity for the food to ferment, which will produce air, but most important, you're not going to get the nutrition that you would otherwise get if that food had enough time to digest. So please try this. I believe you'll like it, and you can include it a few times a week with your meals, and your family will be healthier and happier. Thank you for watching.